The girl held her teddy bear as her reached for the empty chair beside a woman everyone had mocked. One quiet gesture divided the room in two. What kind of truth could make kindness feel so dangerous? The sound. Emma had pinned the silver hair clip above her right ear 3 times before she finally stopped touching it. It was a small thing, no longer perfectly bright, with a tiny scratch near the hinge that only she would have noticed. It had given it to her on a cold afternoon, back when Emma still came to the old woman's apartment before sunrise to help with medication, tea, clean sheets, and the quiet kind of company no chart could record. No. Emma had almost left the clip in the drawer that evening, afraid it looked too plain for a winter charity gala, but her hand had gone back for it before she turned off the light. Yes. The champagne dress hanging from the closet door was borrowed. Her roommate had pressed it for her and said it made her look elegant. But Emma still felt as though the dress belonged to a kinder, confident woman who knew how to enter hotel ballrooms without checking the floor first. She stood in the narrow bedroom of her Chicago apartment, looking at herself in the mirror above the dresser. Outside the window, winter had already darkened the street. A thin line of cold air slipped under the sill, and the radiator clicked as if it were trying and failing to keep up. On the dresser lay the invitation, folded open. Winter Charity Gala, honoring those who preserved dignity for elderly people living alone. Emma had read that line so many times she nearly stopped believing it. Preserved dignity. Theodore sighed. The words felt too polished for the work she knew. There was nothing polished about changing bedsheets after a fever, or learning how someone liked their oatmeal, the bar, or sitting by a frail woman who pretended not to be afraid of the night, and glamorous about rinsing medicine cups, or listening to the same story 5 times, because the person telling it needed to be remembered more than corrected. Still, its name had been connected to the invitation. That was why Emma went. Not for the donors. Not for the ballroom. Not for the smiling people who gave money in public and forgot names in private. She went because Margaret had once held her wrist with surprising strength and told her, "Don't let them make you small, Emma." Emma picked up her coat, checked that the silver clip was secure, stepped out before she could change her mind. The hotel rose over the downtown street, like something from a world she only passed on buses. Glass doors opened into a lobby washed in gold light, and, in dark suits, moved easily through the entrance. Women in long dresses leaned toward one another with soft laughter and careful perfume. Near the coat check, a volunteer with a clipboard glanced at Emma's invitation, then at Emma, and smiled with the practiced warmth of someone trained not to show surprise. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "you're at the center table." For a moment, Emma thought she had misheard. The center table? Yes, through the ballroom doors. "Someone will show you." Emma thanked her, because thinking people was a habit her work had carved into her. She followed a young attendant past tall arrangements of white flowers and into the ballroom, where the light seemed brighter than it had any right to be. The room was full, but not yet seated. The guests stood in clusters around the tables, holding glasses, laughing softly, looking over shoulders to see who had arrived. The center table sat beneath the largest chandelier. Its cream linen was smooth, untouched. Place cards stood in small silver holders. Emma saw her name before she reached the chair. Emma Caldwell. Not guest, not caregiver. Her name, printed in black script, directly facing the room. She should have felt honored. She tried to. Instead, something tightened low in her chest. The attendant pulled the chair out for her, and Emma sat because standing there would have drawn more attention. The chair felt too exposed. From where she was placed, she could see nearly every table in the ballroom, and every table could see her. People's eyes passed over her dress, her hands, the silver clip in her hair. Some looked away quickly. Some smiled with pity. Before they had even met her, a man approached from the right, with the confidence of someone who believed every room improved when he entered it. "Emma Caldwell," he said, and as if her name were part of the evening's decoration. "I'm Preston Hale. We're very glad you could join us." His smile was clean and white, but it did not reach his eyes. Emma stood halfway out of habit, fat again, when he gestured for her not to bother. "I'm grateful to be invited," she said. "Oh, of course." Preston looked toward two men standing behind him, and one of them gave a short laugh. Something funny had been said. Margaret always did have a soft spot for people who made themselves useful. Emma kept her hands folded in her lap. Useful. It was not an insult by itself. She had spent years being useful. She had lifted, carried, cleaned, waited, listened. But from Preston's mouth, the word came wrapped in something colder. "She was very kind to me," Emma said. Preston tilted his head, still smiling. "Yes, he spoke of you often near the end." It touched the family deeply, seeing how attached she became. The men behind him exchanged a glance. Emma noticed it, because home care had taught her to notice small things, the change in a patient. Breathing, the pill left under a napkin, the way family members said generous words while checking their watches. Preston lowered his voice just enough to make it feel private, while ensuring nearby guests could still hear. "Tonight is about compassion," he said. "People need to see what their support means. A young woman like you, working so hard, giving comfort to those who have no one left. It's exactly the kind of story that reminds donors why they come." Story, there it was. Emma looked down at the place setting. 3 forks, 2 knives, crystal water glass, a folded napkin, shaped like something delicate and unnecessary. Her name card stood in front of her, like a label in a display case. She thought of Margaret's apartment, of the faded quilt on the bed, the kettle that whistled too loudly, of the old woman refusing to let Emma leave one evening until she accepted a cup of tea. None of that belonged to this room. None of it had been polished enough for donors. Preston was still talking, now to a couple who had drifted closer. "Emma was one of Margaret's caregivers," he said. "A wonderful example of how even modest lives can touch something larger than." The woman made a soft sound of approval. The man looked at Emma with the mild interest one might give a charity brochure. Emma smiled because she did not know what else to do. Her face felt carefully arranged, her body very still, the silver clip pressed against her hair, small and cool, and she fought the sudden urge to take it off and hide it in her purse. More guests turned toward the center table. Their expressions were not cruel, not yet, made it worse. They looked pleased to have found the emotional center of the evening before dinner had even been served. Preston rested one hand on the back of the empty chair beside her. "Be sure everyone understands your place in Margaret's story," he said. Emma heard the words exactly as he meant them. Not her work, not her name, not her dignity, her place. She glanced across the ballroom toward the doors. During the distance, she could still leave. She could stand, collect her coat, and disappear into the winter street before anyone had a chance to turn her into whatever Preston had prepared. Then her fingers brushed the silver clip in her hair, and Margaret's voice rose in memory, thin but firm. "Don't let them make you small." Emma stayed seated. She straightened her back, lowered her hand to her lap, and looked at the table in front of her with a new, quiet caution. The chair beneath her no longer felt like an honor. It felt like a stage. And for the first time that night, Emma understood that the center table had never been meant to celebrate her at all. It had been placed there so everyone in the ballroom could watch her become a story of pity. The smile on Preston's face did not change. The air around Emma did. It grew smaller. She remained seated at the center table, with her hands folded over the napkin in her lap, the silver clip still holding back her hair like a promise she was afraid to lean on too hard. Around her, the ballroom carried on in its soft winter brightness. Glasses chimed. Chairs shifted. Guests leaned toward one another with the careful cheer of people who had paid to feel generous for an evening. But the circle around Emma had begun to tighten. Preston stood near the back of her chair, with 2 men beside him, both dressed too well to look comfortable. One held a drink he kept lifting without sipping. The other kept glancing at Emma, and then away, as if he wanted the pleasure of watching her discomfort, but not the responsibility of being caught. "You have to admire dedication," Preston said, loud enough for the nearest tables. Some people work their way into a family's heart, one pillbox at a time. A few polite laughs followed. Not loud, not honest, but the kind of laughter people give when they are unsure whether a joke is cruel, but do not want to be the first to refuse it. Emma felt heat rise along her neck. She did not answer. Years of home care had taught her many kinds of silence. The silence of the very sick, the silence of adult children who visited late and left early, the silence of people who wanted service without seeing the hands that gave it. She had learned to keep her face calm while swallowing words that would only make someone else feel accused. Preston seemed encouraged by that calm. Of course, he went on. Margaret was always generous. Too generous, might say. She had a way of collecting causes. The man with the untouched drink smiled. Well, this one turned out nicely. She even dresses for the occasion. That brought a sharper laugh from the group. Emma looked down at the table. Her borrowed champagne dress suddenly felt too bright, too noticeable, as if every thread had become part of the joke. She wanted to press her palms over the fabric and disappear into the chair. Instead, she reached for her water glass and took a small sip she did not need. At a table not far from the center, Nathan sat with his daughter beside him. He had noticed Emma earlier because Lily had noticed her first. The little girl had been quiet since they arrived. One arm wrapped around an old white teddy bear, her other hand resting close to Nathan's sleeve. Crowded rooms had made her uneasy since her mother's funeral. Nathan had almost declined the invitation to the gala. But Lily had wanted to wear her blue dress, and he had told himself it might be good for her to see that help did not always come with shame attached. He was beginning to regret that. Lily leaned closer to him. "Daddy," she whispered, "why are they laughing at that lady?" Nathan followed her eyes. Emma was sitting very still at the center table, face arranged in the careful way grown-ups used when they were trying not to be hurt in public. "They shouldn't be," he said quietly. Lily looked down at her bear and held it tighter. Preston moved a little closer to Emma's chair. He had the easy posture of a man who believed no one in the room would correct him. "Now, Emma, don't look so serious. This is a charity evening. We're all friends here." That word, friends, landed with a softness that made it worse. "I understand," Emma said. Her voice was steady, but only because she kept it small. "Oh, I'm sure you do." Preston smiled toward the guests around them. "People in your line of work understand gratitude better than most, don't they? Being welcomed into homes, being trusted. It must feel wonderful to be appreciated." The woman at the next table lowered her eyes to her plate. Beside her shifted as though suddenly interested in the program card. No one spoke. Emma could feel the trap in the sentence. If she agreed, she accepted the role he had made for her. If she objected, she became ungrateful, too sensitive, difficult. The kind of woman people regretted inviting. She thought of standing up. But the ballroom was large, and the walk to the doors seemed longer than it had when she came in. Free her from the story Preston had already begun telling. It might only finish it for him, so she stayed. Preston's friend gave a soft chuckle. "Maybe we should put her on the brochure next year. The Chumaki mission. Proof your donation comes with a thank you note." This time the laughter was louder. Something in Emma's chest folded inward. She felt herself shrink without moving, felt the terrible old instinct to make herself easier for other people to ignore. She lowered her gaze to the napkin in her lap and wished, with sudden force, that Margaret were still alive, because Margaret could have defended her with money, or lawyers, or any grand gesture. But because Margaret would have looked at her as if she were real. Across the room, Lily's eyes had filled with worry. Nathan saw it. He saw his daughter watching the adults around her, trying to understand which ones were safe. He saw Emma's hands tighten around the napkin. He saw Preston's smile, bright and empty, the way the men behind him borrowed courage from one another's laughter. For a few seconds, Nathan did nothing, not because he agreed, not because he was afraid of Preston. He was thinking of Lily, Ian. He was thinking of how easily a room could teach a child the wrong lesson if no one interrupted it. He had spent too many months after his wife died, hearing lowered voices, receiving help wrapped in pity, helping people decide how grateful he was supposed to look. Then Preston said, "Come now, Emma. Surely you're used to being cared for by generous people." The sentence crossed the line. Nathan pushed back his chair. Sound was not loud, but Lily looked up at him at once. He placed one hand gently on her shoulder. "Bring your bear," he said. Lily slid off her chair without a word, clutching the white teddy to her chest. Several people turned as Nathan walked toward the center table. He was not dressed like the men standing behind Preston. His blue suit was clean but old, the shoulders a little tired, the cuffs showing careful wear. Still, and he moved with a steadiness that made the room notice him. Preston noticed too. "Can I help you?" he asked, with a smile that had begun to harden. Nathan did not answer him first. He stopped beside the empty chair next to Emma, rested one hand on its back, and looked at her. Up close, Emma seemed younger than the room had made her look. There was color in her face from humiliation, not vanity. The silver clip in her hair caught the chandelier light for one brief second, and Nathan saw how hard she was trying not to tremble. May we sit here?" he asked. Emma looked up, startled for a moment. She seemed unable to understand the question. No one had asked her what she wanted since she entered the ballroom. "You don't have to," she said softly. "I know," Nathan replied. That was all. He pulled the chair out, with drama, not as a performance, but with the ordinary courtesy of a man making room at a table. Then he guided Lily to stand beside him. The little girl held her bear tight and looked at Emma with open, troubled eyes. Preston let out a short laugh. "That's generous of you. But I believe this table is arranged for honorees." Nathan turned then. His stayed even. "Then it seems like a good place for her." Around Preston thinned. Emma stared at Nathan, unsure whether to be grateful or frightened for him. A person could pay a price for stepping into another person's embarrassment. She knew that. In rooms like this, the kindness was rarely free. Someone always decided it was foolish, or sentimental, or beneath the evening. Preston's smile slipped for the first time. "You're making quite a moment out of nothing," he said. His hand remained on the back of the chair. "No, I'm ending one." The ballroom did not fall silent all at once. It quieted by degrees. A fork stopped against a plate. A whisper died before it reached the next table. Someone near the front turned fully in their chair. Lily moved closer to Nathan's leg. Her white bear pressed against the side of his suit. She looked at the men behind Preston, then at Emma. Fear in her face softened into something more certain. Her father had chosen where to stand. That was enough for her. Emma felt the change before she trusted it. Only a minute earlier, the chair beside her had been empty space, another reminder that she had been placed alone for everyone to see. Now Nathan stood there with his hand resting on it, and Lily stood beside him with the bear, and the emptiness had been interrupted. Preston glanced around, trying to find the room he had controlled moments before. The men behind him no longer looked quite so amused. One studied his drink, the other adjusted his cuff and avoided Emma's eyes. Nathan pulled the chair a little farther from the table. "If she wants us here," he said, "we'll sit." Every face near the center turned toward Emma, frightened her more than the laughter had. The room was waiting for her to decide whether to accept the help of a stranger. Her mouth felt dry. She could still refuse. Then a sound. She could protect him from being pulled into her humiliation. She could protect herself from needing anything. But Lily was watching her, not with pity, but with hope. Emma looked from the child to Nathan and saw no angle in his expression. No performance, no hunger for applause. Only a quiet, stubborn decency that seemed almost out of place beneath the chandeliers. She gave the smallest nod and sat beside her, and Lily remained close, her bear tucked beneath her chin. For the first time that evening, Emma was not alone at the center table, and in the hush that followed, down. As Preston stood stiff and smiling with nothing useful left to say, the question moved silently through the ballroom. Why would a man who did not know Emma at all risk the comfort of the whole room just to stand beside her, feel peaceful? The silence did not feel table. It settled over the center table like a thin and breakable. Nathan had taken the chair beside Emma, but he did not lean back as if he had won anything. He sat upright, viewed not, one hand resting near Lily's shoulder, his old blue suit looking even plainer under the ballroom lights. Lily stood close enough that her white teddy bear brushed against the side of his jacket. Theo kept her eyes on the table for a moment longer. She had accepted his help, but accepting help was not the same as trusting it. Too many people in that room knew how to turn kindness into a performance. Too many knew how to offer a hand, while making sure everyone saw how generous they were for offering it. Nathan seemed to understand that without being told. He did not ask her to smile. He did not tell her to ignore them. They, the men, were only joking. He simply sat beside her, as though the empty chair had always belonged to someone willing to see her clearly. Preston remained standing a few feet away, shaped into a smile that no longer fit his face. "Well," he said, smoothing the front of his jacket, "I suppose every gala needs a dramatic moment." A few guests gave uncertain little laughs, but they died quickly. The room had changed, and everyone seemed to know it except Preston, who was still trying to pull the old mood back over the table like a tablecloth hiding a stain. Nathan looked at him, calm and steady. It didn't need drama, needed manners. Emma's breath caught, not because the words were loud, but because they were not. Nathan had said them with the plainness of a man naming the weather. Preston's eyes sharpened. "And you are?" Nathan, nothing more. That small refusal seemed to irritate Preston more than a speech would have. He glanced at Nathan's suit, then at Lily, then back at Emma, searching for a place to press his thumb. "How touching," Preston said, her grateful guest coming to the rescue. At that, Nathan's expression changed. Not much, just enough for Emma to see that the remark had found an old bruise. Lily felt it too. She shifted closer to her father, putting both arms around the bear. Nathan did not answer Preston at once. He turned slightly toward Emma, lowering his voice so it belonged first to her, and only afterward to the listening room. "I know what it sounds like," he said, "when people talk about help as if it makes you smaller." Emma looked at him then. He kept his eyes on the water glass in front of him, not because he was ashamed, because some memories asked a person not to stare directly at them. "After my wife passed," he said, "there were months when I couldn't make everything hold together. Work, hospital bills, childcare, groceries. Fund like this one helped us. Not much by the standards of people in this room, maybe. But enough that Lily and I didn't lose the apartment." Lily pressed the bear's worn ear under her chin. Nathan's voice remained even. "Folks were kind, truly kind. Others made sure I understood that every dollar came with a story they were allowed to tell about me." Emma felt the words move through her, slowly. She had been afraid his kindness was pity. He understood it was recognition. Preston gave a short, dry laugh. "That is a very moving history, Nathan. But this evening is not about you." "No," Nathan said, "it isn't. That's why I sat down." And the answer left Preston with nowhere graceful to go. His jaw tightened, and for the first time that evening, he looked less like a host and more like a man guarding a locked door. Fingers rose, without thinking, to the silver clip in her hair. The tiny piece of metal felt cool under her touch. Margaret had chosen it for her one afternoon, after Emma had helped her wash and comb her thinning hair. The old woman had insisted that Emma take it, saying it looked better on someone who still had places to go. Emma had laughed then. She had not believed there were many places waiting for her. Now, Field lay. Cons, sitting beneath a chandelier with a stranger beside her, and a child watching with solemn eyes, she wondered whether Margaret had known something she had not. A soft movement passed through the ballroom entrance. An older woman stepped in, holding a slim folder against her side. She did not hurry, but the way she entered made people notice. Her dark coat was folded over one arm. Her gray hair was neatly pinned. Her face carried the composed gravity of someone who had spent a lifetime speaking only when words mattered. Preston saw her, and the color in his face shifted. Emma noticed that before she recognized the woman. "Ruth," Preston said too quickly. "I wasn't aware you had arrived." The woman gave him a brief look. Clearly, she moved toward the center table, and the small conversations around it faded again. Her gaze found Emma, and for less than a second, then returned to the folder in her hand. Miss Caldwell. She said, "My name is Ruth Bennett. I represented Margaret Ellison." Emma stood halfway, startled by the sound of Margaret's name, spoken so plainly in that room. Ruth gave the smallest shake of her head, as if to say there was no need. "Please, stay seated." Preston stepped closer. "This is hardly the time, dear. It is exactly the time," Ruth said. Her voice did not rise, but it carried. It had the kind of calm that made argument look childish. Emma felt the room tilt toward them. Nathan remained beside her, still as a post. Found. Lily looked from Ruth to Emma, sensing that something important had entered the room, even if she did not understand what it was. Ruth opened the folder. "Margaret asked that certain matters be addressed at this gala," she said. He knew the fund would be discussed tonight. She also knew there might be resistance to her wishes. Preston's smile disappeared. Emma looked at him, then back at Ruth. Until that moment, she had thought Preston's cruelty came from contempt alone. Now she saw something else under it. Fear. Ruth continued. It established a small trust to support home care workers facing exploitation and elderly patients without family advocates. She was very clear about why. She believed the people who give quiet care are often the first to be overlooked and the last to be protected. The silver clip seemed suddenly heavier in Emma's hair. Ruth turned a page. She also named a moral overseer for that fund. Someone she trusted to recognize dignity where others saw only service. Emma stopped breathing for 1 second. Ruth looked directly at her. "She named you, Emma." The ballroom went still, in a way Emma had never heard before. Not empty stillness. Listening stillness. Preston's hand twitched at his side. Emma could not speak. Her first feeling was not triumph. It was not even relief. He choned. It was a kind of frightened tenderness, as if Margaret had reached across death and placed something breakable in her hands. Ruth closed the folder halfway, but kept it visible. "This is not a gift of sudden wealth," she said, as though answering the room before it could misunderstand. "It is a responsibility." Margaret wanted the fund protected from anyone who might turn compassion into display and care into leverage. The words landed near Preston, everyone knew it. Emma looked down at her hands. A few minutes earlier, those same hands had been folded in her lap because she did not know where else to put her shame. Now they rested on the table, still trembling, then longer hidden. But no longer hidden. Nathan did not touch her. He did not congratulate her. He simply stayed beside her, letting the truth have room. Across from them, Preston had gone pale beneath the ballroom light. Feel. And as Ruth held Margaret's papers in full view of the room, Emma understood that the woman she had cared for had not only remembered her, but had trusted her with the one thing Preston had been trying to keep out of her reach. The papers remained open on the table, long after Ruth finished speaking. No one reached for a glass. No one laughed. Even the guests who had spent the evening, pretending not to listen now, sat perfectly still, as if the room itself had been asked to answer for what it had allowed. Emma stood beside the center table, with one hand resting near Margaret's folder. Her fingers trembled, but she did not hide them. A few minutes earlier, she had been a woman, trying to survive a room that had decided what she was worth. Now that same room was waiting for her to decide what kind of person she would become with power in her hands. Preston was the first to move. He gave a small, strained laugh and spread one hand, as if smoothing wrinkles from the air. "This has clearly become more emotional than anyone intended," he said. Margaret was elderly. Grateful, of course, but vulnerable. "I only wanted to make sure no one misunderstood a few sentimental decisions." The word vulnerable made Emma's head lift. Ruth's face stayed calm, but her hand settled firmly on the folder. Preston turned toward the nearby guests, for a sympathetic face. "You all heard what happened. A little teasing, perhaps, but nothing cruel. Certainly nothing that should be twisted into some accusation. It was a joke." The room did not come back to him, at him. Then, truly looked at him. She saw the expensive watch, the stiff smile, the panic tucked behind his eyes. She understood at last that his laughter had never been careless. It had been useful, yes, if he could make her seem small enough, greedy enough, ridiculous enough. Then no one would ask why Margaret's wishes had been slow to appear. For one dangerous moment, Emma wanted to hurt him back. Feel. She wanted to tell the whole room what kind of man mocked a caregiver in front of strangers. She wanted to make him feel what it was like to sit beneath a chandelier while people weighed your worth with their eyes. He felt the silver clip in her hair. Margaret had not left her a weapon. She had left her a responsibility. Emma turned to Ruth. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it held. "Please read the part about oversight again," she said. Ruth gave one small nod and opened the folder wider. She read the terms plainly. Fund was to support home care workers facing unfair treatment and elderly people without family advocates. Emma was named as the person responsible for moral oversight. Family member who had delayed or obstructed the trust's purpose would be permitted to manage its distributions. Preston's face tightened. "That is not necessary," he said quickly. "We can discuss all of this privately." "No," said. The word surprised even her. It was gentle, but it did not bend. She looked at the guests around her, then at the table where the donation forms had been stacked beside glossy programs. "This evening is truly about care," she said. "Then the care should be real. Not a story placed at a table, not a photograph, not a speech that makes people feel kind while the people doing the work stay invisible." A woman near the front lowered her eyes. One of Preston's friends stepped backward from the center table. Emma continued before fear could return. "I don't want anyone humiliated for entertainment. Not even him." He looked at Preston only briefly. "But I want the terms followed. I want Mr. Hale removed from any control over the fund. I want the delay recorded. And if anyone here still wants to help, your name's on a pledge that says the money goes where Margaret intended." For a moment, no one moved. Then Ruth closed the folder with quiet finality. "That can be done." Nathan stood beside Emma, enough to steady her if she needed it. But he did not touch her. He seemed to understand that this part had to be hers. Preston opened his mouth again, but whatever he had prepared sounded useless before he said it. His gaze moved from Ruth to Emma, then to the guests whose laughter had failed him. The power he had carried into the room had depended on people joining him. Without them, he looked suddenly smaller than the insult he had built. At the time, Ruth directed a staff member to bring the pledge forms to the front table. Several donors had already risen. Not all of them, not even most at first. But enough they came quietly, one by one, their names, without speeches. Preston remained near the center table until Ruth informed him, with the same calm she had used to read Margaret's wishes, that his role in the fund would be suspended pending formal removal. One applauded. That was what made it feel clean. He left the ballroom with his jaw tight and his eyes lowered, stripped not by shouting, but by the simple loss of permission to keep pretending. Weeks later, first apartment was ready. It was not grand. It sat on a quiet street in Chicago, with clean walls, warm light, and a small kitchen where someone could make tea without asking permission. The bedroom had fresh sheets, room had new grab bars. Near the front door, Nathan tightened the last screw in the rail and tested it twice with his weight. Emma watched from the hallway, wearing the silver clip again. It handled the paperwork. The fund had become real, not large enough to save everyone, but real enough to save someone. Preston's name was gone from every document that mattered. Its wishes had moved from paper into wood, paint, linen, and a lock that opened. The first person to receive help was an older home care worker, whose own health had begun to fail after years of caring for others. She stood in the doorway, with one hand over her mouth, looking at the room as though afraid it might disappear if she stepped inside. "It's only temporary," Emma said softly. "But it's yours while you need it." The woman nodded, unable to answer. Lily, who had been waiting beside Nathan, with her white bear tucked under one arm, walked to the small chair near the window. It was the first piece of furniture Emma had chosen for the apartment. Simple, sturdy, Lily looked at her father for permission. Nathan smiled. Then the little girl placed the bear gently on the seat. Emma felt something inside her loosen. The chair at the gala had been a place where she was displayed, senior. The chair beside it had become a place where someone chose to stand with her. This one was different. This chair was waiting for whoever came in tired, frightened, or ashamed, and needed to know they had not been forgotten, and stepped back from the railing and looked around the apartment, his expression quiet. Margaret would have liked this, he said. Emma touched the silver clip once, not to steady herself this time, but to remember. Yes, he said. I think she would have. By the window, Lily adjusted the bear so it sat upright on the chair, facing the door. Sunlight fell across its worn white fur, softening every old seam, and for the first time since the gala, Emma looked at an empty chair and did not feel exposed. She saw a place saved for someone who had not arrived yet, and she was ready to open the door.